Good afternoon, good morning from Cairo, Egypt. We'll be live here today for a very, very interesting talk and discussion with Dr. Rozan Yunus, the president of Brunei's Historical Society. And while we're waiting for Dr. Rozan to join us shortly, I would like to say hi to all of you, wherever you're from, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, of course, Thailand, the Philippines. Hello, good morning from Cairo, Egypt. Today, Thursday, March the 20th, it's now at 11 a.m. in Cairo, where I am now. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of issues and points about Brunei's rich tapestry of old and new cultural heritage in the heart of Southeast Asia, or ASEAN. So let's see if Dr. Rozan has joined us. Dr. Rozan. So if you've seen, or if you have not seen yet, that Dr. Rozan is the president of Brunei's Cultural Heritage Society. And when you go to the Instagram account, then you will see a lot of interesting contents about Brunei. For those of you who are interested or who are curious about how Brunei, the small but oil-rich country in the heart of Southeast Asia, looks like, or how it is thriving in the midst of ever-growing economy like Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, in the region. And hi, Dr. Rozan. Let me know if you're joining me already. Just wave, and then I will invite you to join this Instagram live. All right. Or maybe you can say hi before we start, or you can write down any questions or comments about Brunei or about Southeast Asia that you might have in the comment section. And I will, of course, forward that to Dr. Rozan during our Instagram live event this afternoon. Okay, hold on a second. Any requested? Hold on a second. Dr. Rozan is here. Just need to hold on a second. Stay tuned with me. Hold on a second. I might have to use the Wi-Fi here. So hold on a second. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. I can't see the. Oh, there we go. Good morning. Good afternoon, Dr. Razan. How are you? Perfect. Hi, Dr. Razan.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum.
Hey,
Good afternoon
Waalaikumsalam.
in Bandar Seri Begawan. How are you doing,
Yes.
Dr. Razan?
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's late afternoon here. It's 5 o'clock in Brunei. I know you are in Cairo, so yeah, the marvel of technology.
So
It
we'll be
can.
talking about the marvel of technology, exactly. So we'll be
That's
talking
right.
a lot about that as well, Dr. Rozan. I'm
Okay.
happy to have you with us this morning or this afternoon, wherever we are.
Yeah.
Um, and today we'll be talking about Brunei Darussalam as a rich tapestry of old and new cultural
Okay.
heritage in the heart of ASEAN. For those of you who just joined us, I'd like to introduce you. Dr. Rozan is the president of Brunei's Cultural Heritage Society. And then we'll be talking a lot about Brunei's old and new cultural heritage today for the next 1 hour.
Yeah.
And for those of you who have any questions, or if you're curious about Brunei, about Bandar Seri Begawan, or about the people, the culture, whichever you have in your mind, you can type it down on the comment section, and we'll be very happy. Dr. Rozan will be very happy to answer to your question.
We'll try. We'll try. Inshallah.
We'll try. So how's Ramadan going in Brunei,
Uh,
Dr. Rozan?
Alhamdulillah, we've got another less than 10 days now. So
Let's
so I think everybody's
10 days.
looking
Yeah.
forward. It's about 10 days, I think. So everybody's looking forward to the end of the. Nobody's looking forward actually in that sense, but I
Yeah,
think after
that's true.
1 month, after 1 month of fasting, so I can see the roads are now filled with cars.
Right.
Everybody's going out shopping, preparing for the Eid and so on. So I guess it's the same. And I don't know how what it's like in Egypt, but
Oh,
here,
it's the same. It's oh, I mean, like when we are talking about the old and new, like
yes,
we have the old Cairo and then the new Cairo as well,
I
and they are just completely different world, Dr. Razan. Completely different world.
can imagine. Yeah, yeah. But that's how the Muslim world goes. So
Exactly. Yeah.
we do have the celebrations which we have to go. We have to undergo all the ibadahs and so on. So yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean that's what brings us together. In fact, that's the whole thing. That's what we're going to be talking about today about Brunei, the Islamic tapestry, and so on. So that will be, our topic for the day.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So I was in Brunei actually.
Well,
It was my first experience, but hopefully not my last. 10 years
well,
ago, it was yeah. Sometime in spring 2015, and I stayed there for about 3 days and 2 nights
all right.
before flying to Kota Kinabalu,
Yeah.
and I got a very very good impression, and it was a very memorable experiences for me
Alhamdulillah.
as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to returning very soon, Dr. Razan.
Yes, we'll be most
Inshallah.
happy to see you here. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah.
Yes.
Inshallah. So, Dr. Razan, to start off, there is this very thought-provoking question about Brunei, probably for all of us. So, what makes Brunei's cultural heritage unique, and how does it reflect its history as a Malay Islamic monarchy?
Well, I think the first thing that people sometimes forget that Brunei, one of the memorable quotes I remembered when Brunei gained its independence on the 1st of January 1994. What
Mhm.
people were saying, I think I cannot remember which newspaper that put it, but very succinctly they said, Brunei is a new nation, but an old
Mhm.
country. And that's I think that's the crux of the whole thing. So even though we gained our independence the 1st of January 1994, but if you look at the history of Brunei, people forget that as early as the 5th century, Brunei was already mentioned in Chinese records. So that means
Wow.
our existence have been around for 1,500, 1,600 years old. So
Yeah.
that
That,
alone, I think is when you think about it, what Brunei is in some sense an essence of what went on in the past towards what we can see of today. So that means when you talk about Brunei, you do have to consider the pre-Islamic history of Brunei, as well as the Islamic history of Brunei. So sometimes people forget that that's also what it looks like in other culture in Southeast
right.
Asia as well. So there is that is also not just we're not just talking about one event. We're talking about a whole series of events. So in Brunei's case, 1,600 years old. So when you start to look at it from that perspective, then you realize, okay, so many things have been going on in this country. And when you look
Mhm.
at Brunei as well, you'll see the shrinking, the expanding size of Brunei. At one stage, the whole island of Borneo was under the control of the Brunei Sultanate. As far
Mhm.
as far north, as to the south, the southern of the south side of the Philippines, as well as the northern side of Indonesia and so on. But those were the days, when we used to be big.
Right.
But when you look at Brunei now, you suddenly realize, oh, okay, this is not a big country anymore. This is squeezed down to these tiny little bits.
Yeah.
And in fact, and some people will say, I was told my students, I said, look, we were lucky. We could have squeezed down anywhere. We squeezed down to the part where the oil is. So I mean, when you think about it, so we were lucky. So I think also in some sense, um, if you were talking about the history of Brunei, there is always this things about. I mean, just like any other history of any country, there's always the ups and the downs and so on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes it so. If you just start to look at it, the richness and the wealth of the culture is a reflection of the time and the reflection of the history that went on. So this is how we looked at it. So this is one way. If you were to start to look at Brunei's history, then you have to take into consideration the past that it has. So even some of the names of say, for instance, the island of Borneo.
Mhm.
Um, historically speaking, a lot of people said the word Borneo actually comes from the word Brunei in itself. So if you to look at, if you were to look, say, at Brunei, then if you look at Brunei, in the old maps, say map of the 15th century, it will say Brunei as Brunei, Borneo proper, whereas the Borneo island is referred as the island of Borneo. So
Yeah.
this is why you can say there's distinction. So it's hard to answer your question in the sense what makes Brunei unique in that sense.
Yeah.
But I would say the wealth of history, the
Interesting.
the 1,500 years of history, and that's what gets
Yeah.
captured in the history of Brunei. So, but of course, obviously, I think the more recent history is easier to focus on, especially the history of the Islamic when Islam came to Brunei and so on. So,
Mhm.
but Brunei is always seen from that Islamic perspective, and yet, we have a lot of practices which evolve from the various times and so on. So, and that's
Mhm.
something that makes it unique.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and talking about the size and then the length of the history
Yeah.
itself. But now, let's take a look at the location. How has Brunei's strategic location in the heart of ASEAN influenced its cultural exchange and trade throughout the history, Dr. Razan?
Okay. I think first of all, geography plays a very important role. I think
Of
in
course.
terms of especially the history of Brunei. One of the things that which people forget that nowadays we use shapes, we use so
Yeah.
it doesn't really. But in the older days, when we were using the ships with sails and so on, so we're very much dependent on what we used to be the monsoon. Well, we still have it, the monsoon seasons.
Mhm.
When ships just travel in one direction because the wind was blowing from one direction, and then at certain times of the day it will be blowing in the other direction. So that means there were a lot of trades between Southeast Asia and China at that particular point in time. So the ships would be traveling up and down through this. And Brunei happened to be strategically located in the center of that trade. So that means if you look at the map now, don't look at the map. If you look at the map now, then suddenly you realize that if you look along the coast of the Borneo Island, along the
Mhm.
northwestern coast, then you realize that the Brunei Bay, where the capital is currently located, actually was very strategic because that's when ships passing by through the trades between China and Southeast
Right.
Asia would
That's
actually
true.
stop.
Yeah.
So would actually
Uh-huh.
stop. So
Yeah.
that's what sort of made Brunei grew in terms of
Right.
wealth in the place because it was actually in one of the earliest strategic points,
Yeah.
if you want to call it.
Yeah.
Will
Right.
actually come, the ships actually come and stay, in protected area along the bay. So Brunei
Mhm.
became, in a sense, sort of a maritime center. I mean, it wasn't a big one, compared to any of the other maritime center, but it was big enough that it served as an entry port to many people living in the interior of the island to
Yeah.
trade with Chinese traders and so on. So that's one. So that's looking at it from a very strategic center of Brunei. And secondly, I think the other thing also is that Malacca used to be the center of Islamic activity in Brunei in the
Mhm.
16th century. But when Malacca was taken over by the Portuguese, so the center shifted to Brunei. So Brunei became the Islamic center. I think Malacca fell around 1511. So Brunei became sort of the alternative center. So from
Right.
Brunei, there was a lot of Islam being spread from Brunei to the southern Philippines, to the whole of the island of Borneo and so on. So it shifted. So the dynamic shifted from Malacca to Brunei. So that's a role again that people don't realize that what Brunei was in those days were doing. So to the point that I think once Brunei became the Islamic center of activity at that point in time, and we also have the Spanish coming over to the Philippines at that point in
Mhm.
time. Spaniards, remember, if you're, for some of your viewers who are, looking at history and so on, the
Yeah.
Spaniards basically were they left Europe, they went to Central America, and from Central America, they went all the way to the Philippines and so on.
Right.
So in fact, we had a war. We had probably one of the biggest war we had was between Brunei and the Philippines. Sorry, not Brunei and the Spanish who were based in the Philippines at that point in time. So the
Oh
Castile
wow.
War is probably
Uh-huh.
one
Yeah.
of the biggest. And sometimes when I teach my students, I said, you don't realize because Spain at that point in time was a superpower, and that is Brunei. We were fighting against a
Yeah.
superpower. So
Yeah.
that's how. When you think about it in that perspective, yes, I mean we were at that point in time, but of course, obviously, things have grown since then,
Yeah.
and changes. So now we moved on as Brunei became independent in 1984. Now we're in the heart of ASEAN. I mean, in terms of physical location and so on.
Mhm.
But we are
Mhm.
also serving around, because when you start to look at ASEAN, you also have to start looking at the economic. I mean, there's a lot of diversity in ASEAN, like it or not. We have
Yeah.
countries with varying degrees of growth and development. I mean, that's to be expected. So where Brunei is actually currently is interesting because around our area, around the Sabah, Sarawak, and the Kalimantan area, and currently we are the only sovereign state, sovereign country, because the
Mhm.
others are actually part of, so the capital of those
That's
countries are
true.
not within Borneo. Brunei is the only one.
That's yeah.
But of course,
Yeah.
IKN is moving. So
Yeah.
Jakarta is making his capital. So we're going to have two capitals now. So in on the island of Borneo. So which is interesting. But
That's true.
again, Brunei. I think one of the things about Brunei is that we've always considered ourselves. I think if we look at our foreign policy, it's always been of non-interference and so on. So we go our own way. We believe in the spirits of ASEAN because being a small country, it probably be harder for us but like I said, we've always believed in peace and so on, and again, like between us, I think Singapore, Brunei are the two smallest countries at the moment within ASEAN. But so in terms of, but the other thing is that ours was because of our oil wealth and so on. So we are sort of disproportionately wealthier in terms of GDP, and Singapore's, of course,
That
yeah. So per capita,
that's true.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that makes it a very unique combination when you think about it. Small
exactly.
country, yeah. So so that's how we've sort of looked at it strategically and so on. Brunei, I
Yeah,
think we've always been. When I was working for the government, we've always believed I've attended many meetings on various sectors in the ASEAN circuit, and it's always interesting to see how we can contribute and so on, how we can actually move things along. So I think in terms of uh, in terms of um, probably maybe I'm exaggerating, but I believe we would be contributing a lot despite our small size. So that
of course.
probably
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
So, Dr. Rozan, that Brunei was once the center of the Islamic sort of
yeah,
civilization or back in the days.
yeah.
So, and talked a lot about that. Would you add briefly the role does Islamic sort of value and thoughts or school of thoughts play in shaping Brunei's cultural identity, and how is it reflected in its customs, traditions, and architecture?
I think if you look at Brunei, we embrace when Sultan Muhammad, who used to be Awang Alap Matatar,
Uh-huh.
embraced Islam around the 14th century. Islam sort of remained throughout the country since then. We believe Islam actually came much earlier to Brunei, but it wasn't a major religion at that point in time, because I think way back in the 13th 12th century, we were still influenced by other religions as well, which is
Right.
uh, the Hinduism, Buddhist, and so on. But when Islam
Yeah.
took over Brunei, supposedly in 1368, according to our history,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
when sort of Islam sort of permeated into the country. But we have to remember, we do practice this philosophy called the MIB in Brunei. It's the Malay Islamic Malays, Melayu Islam Raja. So they found all three factors. So we take into account the Malay culture and the Malay language, including the Malay adat istiadat, the customs and royal customs and
Yeah.
traditions and so on. But we also take into account the Baraja, which means the monarchy, which means the kingship. Because the kingship in Brunei actually goes, like I said, a long, long way. It's not just
Yeah.
within Islam. The Islamic kingship, of course, obviously, when Sultan Muhammad Shah became the first sultan but he wasn't the first king. We have had, many, many other kings before that. Of course, they were not Muslims. And the third factor is, of course, the Islamic bit, the Islamic part of the whole equation of the MIB. So even though Islam plays a very important role in determining the culture of Brunei and so on,
Mhm.
but we also influence in some sense of our past. So you'll
Right.
start to see some of our other that or the royal customs and traditions.
Yeah.
Well, actually, some of it were done, in the older days, before Islam
Yeah.
came about. But of course, obviously, a lot of it has the Islamic influence has, of course, changed many of these other istiadat. So over the years, I think what we feel is not Islamic,
Yeah.
so that sort of
Yeah.
gets removed. So so even you will see some of the major physical changes. For instance,
Yeah.
if you look at the crest of the royal family, it used to
Mhm.
be it used you know, if you look at Brunei's crest now, it's got the crescent, the flag, and everything,
Right.
and two, which goes like this on the side of
Yeah.
it. But previously, it used to be two golden cats. So that's sort of got
Ah.
removed, and you
Ah.
know, so a
Interesting.
lot of the things get
Yeah.
Islamized. So in that sense, but I
Yeah.
think the most important thing is that Islam is now very much a culture within the country in itself, within the fabric of society. So
Right.
even within the governance, I mean, we practice what we call
Yeah.
an Islamic governance. Of course, an Islamic governance is not that much different in terms of, you know, the good things that we wanted to do. But obviously, there is that the worship culture, you know, belief in God would be different compared
Mm,
to any other governance in place. So Islam actually, yes, is very much influential in the day-to-day things that we do.
mhm,
You know, the way we conduct our policies and so on would actually be based on Islamic, especially I think around 2018. Um, His Majesty has always spoken about an Islamic government, even as far back as 1980, then 1980s, you know, when Brunei gained its independence. But around 2018, His Majesty started to talk about the Maqasid Sharia. So Maqasid Sharia is the for those of you who are listening in and not very familiar with it, Maqasid Sharia is the objectives of the religion. So now Maqasid Sharia is a very strong a very strong influence in terms of the things that we do. So the currently the five maqasid, which is the preservation of the faith, preservation of life, preservation of the intellect, preservation of wealth, and preservation of progeny. That basically is how the Islamic governance is now taking place. And in doing so, we
mm.
actually place many of our policies accordance to the Islamic governance based on Maqasid Sharia. So Islam, yes, plays a very important role within the concept, within the policies of the government, and within a lot of the things that we do within government as well as outside government.
Interesting. Very thought-provoking about how Islam plays a lot of roles in different aspects in the country. So now let's talk about the literature or the sort of a more cultural heritage of Brunei.
Okay.
Here, yeah. Can you share some stories about Brunei's rich tradition of oral storytelling, such as the epic poem like the Syair Awang Semaun?
Yeah. I think Brunei is very strong in terms of doing shair and so on. That's poems, you know. I think if you were to look at our, I don't know whether you're familiar with, there is an award which is awarded by the Thailand, which is the Southeast Asia Sea Right Award, the Southeast Asia Right Award. And quite a lot of the winners from Brunei side actually are poets, you know, so they actually are good at shair and so on. So shair has always been a source of one of the things about the history of, you know, mostly in our part of the world, not just in Brunei but also in Southeast Asia. We talk about you know we don't have this you know, unlike the Chinese, where there's proper written records passed down from generation to generation, we don't have
Mm-hmm.
that. But what we do have is actually stories being told down the generation. So Shair Awang Semaun is one of those things, which talked about, you know, which actually talks about a lot about the history of Brunei. And Shair Awang
Right.
Semaun, there are quite a few other Shair, but Shair Awang Semaun is probably the most well known among all, and it does talked about the history of Brunei, even from the founding of Brunei all the way up to the end. So that means not all the sorry, I shouldn't say the word all the way up to the end, up to about the 16th, 17th, about the 17th or 18th century. So you'll hear stories about Brunei being told in Shair Awang's mouth. So a lot of the things that we know about Brunei are actually passed down through legends. So it's not exactly, we don't have books, we don't have, you know, books weren't, you know, in Brunei, I think you probably around the 18th or 19th century before we start to see something being. But before that, it was based on this epic tales. It was based on a lot of the Shair and so on. So one of the interesting story which came out from the Shair was actually how Brunei was founded. So that's something. So when Brunei was set to be there's a long story about it, but I'll just cut it short to the bit that says so
Sure. Yeah.
there were 14 brothers. So 14 brothers actually went out from a place from one of our other districts to find a
Yeah.
new place to live.
Yeah.
So when they found this place, so in those days everything was done by boat, sorry, with paddles and so on. So they found this place, which is good. They said they could fish there, they could do a lot of things there. Water is available and so on. So they've been searching for that place for a long time. So once they found it, they said that they used the word baruna. So baruna
Mhm.
basically translate to now we found it. Baru
Ah,
now we found it.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is said that the country Brunei came from the word baruna. So that's
Interesting.
one that which is actually
Wow.
stated in the
Yeah.
Shair. But of course, academicians have other theories and so on. But that's
Right.
one story that I can tell that the Shair actually has a lot of stories like that. So it is interesting. I mean, I've honestly
Yeah.
speaking, I've never read it through and through. It's just too thick for me to read through. But there
Yeah.
are big pieces which you can just pick up and say, oh, this is interesting. This is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Baruna. So that means that sort of became the official version of how Brunei became Brunei. So that
Right.
was
Yeah.
the start.
I
The
didn't
start of
know that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
The
that
story
that
is
you
really interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
but of course, I think there's a lot of theory as well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Brunei, the word, there's another word in Sanskrit called varunai, varunai, which means sea. So so there's a lot of
Sir.
theory. But Varuna is sort of the one that we use officially, the one which is taught to students and so on, which is
Right.
acceptable.
Yeah.
But we don't really know what does this mean. But that sounds plausible enough, you know what I mean? So Shair
Yeah.
Wangsman is important in raising the understanding of Bruneians, especially, what they need to understand, what is going on in Brunei and so on.
Yeah.
So Shair Wangsman is actually a very good read. If I would recommend that to anybody who wants to read more about Brunei to read Shair Wangsman. Unfortunately, it's not been translated. So it's actually still in Malay. So maybe one day, I do hope that somebody would go around to actually trying to translate it, and so that it can reach a wider audience.
Of course, we can work together on that, on the
Yeah,
translation project.
that's
We've got
something.
him,
Yeah,
Garda, and then we can, like further this discussion, a
yeah.
real concrete project, Dr. Roshan. All
But
right.
Shair,
Right.
I remember the father of the current Sultan Umar Ali Saifuddin, wrote
Yeah.
quite a number of Shair as well. So his, Shair
Mhm.
as a form of, knowledge, as a form of information, as a form of
Yeah.
culture. Is very, very much evident in Brunei. So you will find a lot of means, a lot of issues about Brunei being you can read it actually in the Shair, in many of the Shair.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. So, and now, how has Brunei's cultural heritage been preserved and promoted through its museums? As we all know that in a small country, I visited one of the most interesting museums at the time, 10 years ago, and then I saw the Royal Regalia, which is very grandeur, and I was very impressed at the time. So, such as the Brunei Museum and the Malay Technology Museum,
Mm.
Dr. Razan.
Okay, we have quite a number of museums. I personally sit as a member of the museums board. So we do look after quite a number of museums throughout
Yeah.
Brunei. Of course, as in many other countries, the preservation of our cultural artifacts, both
Mhm.
physical and as well as non-physical, or rather, I think if you were to use the UNESCO word, the tangible and the non-tangible heritage,
Exactly.
we looked at.
Yeah.
We have we have at the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports, we have a special department which focus very much on looking after the cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. So in that sense, cultural heritage has always been in our place. I think in terms of handicraft and so on, so we do have we do have our own handicraft schools, so as to make sure that traditions is being kept alive. We have a lot of again, we have the cultural preservation in terms of buildings and so on. So yes, we do take care of a lot of these things. But unfortunately, I think I would have to say Bruneians are not great at keeping things. That's my personal opinion. Because sometimes some of the buildings which we wanted to preserve is not able to meet that criteria of being undisturbed, So that
Right.
means if I was to say declare Kampong Air as a heritage site, then it will not be able to do it simply because changes have been made so fast to the place that. So we have not been very good at that. That is something I would have to think. We're not good at keeping. I mean, we've got a lot of museums and so on, keeping all the artifacts. But I think in terms, we're starting to lose out simply because I think modernization is coming in and so on.
Right.
So so a lot of the things that the tradition that we're starting to lose out. So so that's something that we probably need to look at. Even it's a simple thing as a wedding. I think previously, if you look at a wedding, there are like 10 separate stages that you go through. But nowadays,
Right.
because of modernity, because of probably costs and so on, so you probably just cut down to, let's get married and here it is, So
Right.
instead of going through the various so we're starting to lose that. But in terms of the royal customs and tradition, that's being kept alive. If you've
Yeah.
been to the recent royal wedding of His Majesty's son, Prince Abdul
Yeah.
Mateen,
Yeah.
that you can see the full regalia,
Right.
in progress. But in terms of the general day to day, probably I would say we do our best in trying to maintain it. But I have a feeling that sometimes it might be a losing battle as well, simply because I think changes in society, changes in
Yeah.
tradition, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, so it's also a challenge for us in that sense of
Yeah.
how do we maintain this, in the light of this modern world.
Yeah. Having said that, apart from the challenges,
Yeah.
Dr. Rozan, what are some of the traditional Bruneian arts and crafts, such as wood carving or silver work or textiles, and how are they being kept alive today? Like, I mean, I saw a lot of Bruneians are very proud wearing the traditional costume
Yeah.
of the Malay
Yeah.
Brunei. So, would you? Yeah.
What
Thank you.
one of the things that of course I think clothing is much easier to maintain. So I
Yeah.
think weaving, what we call in Brunei call the Malay style, that thing, that sort of skirts that you wear in between. I know the Indonesians don't have it, but the Malays,
Yeah.
basically, Brunei is called sinjang. So sinjang is something is this piece of cloth that you wear, around your hips and so on. And Brunei,
Right.
one of the things that we do there we always use what we call kanjong sarat. So Tanjong
Uh-huh.
Sarat is weaved with gold threads and so on, gold and colorful threads, and we're pretty much proud of that simply because that's purely uniquely Brunei,
Yeah.
uh, and that is actually taught. We have schools which are actually teaching that. We have equipments which are actually still producing that. So that's probably one of the better examples of our culture being passed down the generation.
Right.
Of course, there are other culture. There are other, like you said, the handicraft. We do have what we call silversmith. We do have what we call the
Uh-huh.
goldsmith.
Mhm.
In fact,
Mhm.
there is one particular village in Kampong Air called Kampong Pandai Besi.
In
So Pandai means clever, clever in
Yeah.
making besi is metal. So
Yeah.
so it's actually a kampong in Kampong Air, which used to be called Kampong Pada Besi, where
Uh-huh.
practically everybody living, all the inhabitants living in that area knows how to make something out of metal. So
Interesting.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that, I mean, so what happened also is that in terms of history, when you start to look at all these works and so on,
Yeah.
in the old days, many of our traditions or our handicraft were actually done at Kampong Ayat, the water village. The water
Mm-hmm.
village divided itself into several wards. So each ward would sort of have a what we call a, I think today you would call it a closed guild. In other words, um, you have to be a member of that particular village or that particular ward
Wow.
be
Yeah.
able to learn certain things. So that means
Yeah.
they sort of kept that secret among themselves. So either you marry in or you were born in it. But if
Right.
you were from outside, then you can't get that knowledge because I guess in those days that's where the income come from. So you need
Right.
to protect the knowledge that you have. So,
It's
but
like
over
the
the years, yeah, that's right. But over the years, I think what happened is that nobody is, even the people living in the village, no longer practicing it. So to the point that I think
ah,
around the 1960s, the 1970s, the government decided to introduce a training center. So they started
mm,
to take the people away from, the people who are good at it to be able to become teachers. So now it's actually being taught not just at particular village. Now, anybody who wants to apply to become an artisan, to be able to do all these things, they can actually now
right.
go to a government center and do it. So that's probably one of the best effort which the government has undertaken in
Right.
order to ensure that this all this well all this uh, cultural heritage still remain in place. So that's one effort. The other efforts, of course, obviously through the Malay Islamic Monarchy, the MIB, the Melayu Islam Beraja, because we
Yeah.
do have, it's part of our school. So you have to study MIB right from the primary school all the way up to university level. So that's
Mhm.
very so. Included among that would be understanding what the cultural heritage is, understanding all the various things that we have to do in order to maintain our cultural, our basically the history of our culture
Right.
throughout the. So the government do take into account, some of the issues which is affecting the loss of all these cultures by
Yeah.
taking certain measures. So I think you've also visited the Malay Technology Museum,
Yeah.
and you can see a lot of the things actually there. So the Malay
Yeah.
Technology Museum is actually very
Yeah.
useful in understanding the history of the culture of Brunei.
Right.
But of course the
Uh,
Royal Regalia is different because Royal Regalia focus very much on the royal customs and traditions. That you saw that already.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, stepping back, talking about the royal wedding,
Yeah.
Dr. Razan, how does Brunei's cultural heritage influence its modern day festivals like the royal wedding, the celebrations such as the Sultan's birthday, and the Hari Raya Idul Fitri, which is coming very soon in about
Yeah.
days?
Okay. Most of the royal traditions are being kept alive. In other words, because it's a bigger national event. So those don't change much. But you'll see some of the changes, like probably in terms of what the brides will be wearing, what the groom would
Mm,
be wearing, and so on. I mean, there is
yeah.
that Brunei culture in it, but I think there's also now starting to be infused with probably Western elements, but
Yeah.
keeping the Brunei culture alive. So this is what is this is what mostly we can see nowadays. This is what's happening, even though the Brunei culture is still there, but you can see elements of modernity creeping into all
Mhm.
this culture. Um, Hari Raya would be again different. I think Hari Raya has always been changes. I would say uh, the Brunei Malay culture itself, I think, is simple from what I can understand from the research that I've seen. So, in other words, it used to be a simple Hari Raya. But I think
Right.
over time, as Brunei's wealth increase, and there is this what we call cross-cultural pollination from Malaysia, from Indonesia, and so on. So
Mhm.
you start to see things which probably say 60, 70 years ago were not there. Now this is part of I think for instance, one of the famous one we always say we always associate Hari Raya with would be satay and ketupat. Okay, but satay and ketupat it's not. If I was to read the history of Brunei, satay and ketupat
Right.
was never part of Brunei's culture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ketupat has always been there because ketupat is probably one of the few things which you can bring, traveling with you and so on.
Right.
This ride, yeah. But satay and so on, we didn't have it until as recently as about 1980s. So in other words, that's sort of I would say that's sort of cross pollination, a cross cultural pollination from Malaysia. So so you have to start to see some of the really really tradition Brunei. It's like some of the food that we have is no
Yeah.
longer there simply because I think people are more used to the newer kind of food and so on. So
Right.
the, so in terms of practice and so on, so there's just some of the elements are starting to sort of
Yeah.
disappear, or sort of, they're seen as quaint. So you can write whole article. I've written whole articles about changes in terms of even between Brunei Hari Raya in the 1960s to now. So even that
Yeah.
within a short period of time, within the short period of about 60, 70 years, we can see a lot of changes already happening. So
Yeah.
let alone talk about going further back in time.
Right.
So that's
So
something.
now talking about opportunities, Dr. Razan, what are opportunities and challenges that arise from balancing the preservation of cultural heritage with modernization and development in Brunei? And probably, getting a lot of influence from Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the neighboring.
um, but not really challenges. Challenges will always be there in terms of
Yeah.
how pure you want it to be.
Right.
Again, some people will say culture needs to adapt. So which I think is always a plus sign. But of course, I think in terms of opportunity would obviously be. I think in most cases, culture is actually good for your tourism industry. For any, especially in Brunei, where we need to diversify away from our oil and gas. So culture is always a good opportunity for people to come to Brunei, come to see the uniqueness in terms of Brunei. So that's where the opportunity comes in. Because obviously there is always, when we talk about certain cultural materials such as the Xinjiang I was talking about, the woven cloth. So that's always something which I think would always be useful for our society in terms of its commercial value and so on. But challenges, obviously, one of the harder ones is like I've talked about throughout our conversation, is
Yeah.
actually how do you maintain it? How do you maintain a society when the whole world outside is forcing you to change? And then that's difficult. I think that's not just a question which Bruneians have to face, but a question which many of the society have to face. But of course,
Right.
obviously, sometimes when people say it's good to have challenges because that's when you realize how important the things are. So
Right.
if you don't have it, then people just don't bother about it. So I look at challenges as also an opportunity in the sense that so that people are more aware of what's going on, so that
Right.
and because we talked about if you don't do anything about it, we're going to lose this, and that's important because it's also something which we can use. So to push
Yeah.
people into realizing that our culture is not always going to be there. So that's something that we need to look at.
Interesting. So, two last questions, Dr. Rozan, before we conclude this very interesting and thought-provoking discussion we have. Um, Now about tourism, can you discuss the significance of Brunei's traditional water villages, such as the Kampung Air, and efforts to preserve this beautiful, beautiful heritage in the country?
Um, Kampong Air has always been, I think, for a policymaker. I remember when I was the Ministry of Development, we've always wondered what to do with it. In other words, it's there, but we also
Mhm.
worry. simply because what we have tried now. We look at Kampong Air, for instance. Kampong Air is, from afar it looks great. Yeah, you look, all these
Right.
beautiful, all these
Yeah.
houses
Yeah.
built along the river, and so on. And sometimes you wonder how in the world did we manage to build houses. For our Kampong Air is probably the biggest water village. Water village actually is quite common in Borneo. So,
Uh,
but the Brunei one actually is the biggest.
that's true.
So
Yeah.
that's what.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain Kampong Air? So that's always a question in that we have always tried to find an answer to. Of course, there are rules and regulations nowadays. We used to have massive fires in Kampong Air because the houses are all wood, built out of wood. So it doesn't take very long just to have one spark, and then the whole kampong will just blow up in
Yeah.
fire. So what we do now is that in order to preserve it, we have rules and regulations. In other words, you can't do anything that you want. Just previously it was basically uncontrolled, but nowadays we do have control. We do have a lot of what do you call this? A lot of rules and laws in place now. So
Mm.
Kampong Air is probably one of the few, and I think also within part of the tourism master plan. Kampong Air is
Yeah.
actually part of a bigger plan. We do have plans in it. So, if you go to Kampong Air now, you'll probably find not only probably, you will find actually quite a few good restaurants along the area now. So you actually can go in and all this, have this hidden gems, so you have to cross the river if you want to eat something nice. So that's one way of looking at it. And also, I think the government always consider Kampong Air as an important settlement area. So we do have, you go to Kampong Air, you've got schools, you've got secondary schools, you've got primary schools, you've got mosques, you've got government clinics, and so on. So and we even have fire stations on water.
Yeah.
So the government
Yeah.
do take into account that people will be living in Kampong Air. So we make
Right.
sure that the facilities reach the people out there. So the water is there, all the electricity is actually there. We
Right.
somehow managed to get across. Yeah, so so yeah, everything is there. So, but what the government is also trying to do is to see whether some sort of modernity can be brought in. So we've got like
Exactly. Yeah.
there's already some projects where
Mm.
some of the houses which you can see on land now being built. So that means you got
Mm.
two-story houses, concrete houses being built,
Yeah.
complete with a sewerage system and so on. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's the future of Kampong Air, but
Mhm.
but you can go there, you can be modern, you can be,
Yeah.
but of course, obviously, the most difficult thing I remembered was when we wanted to get this as a UNESCO World Heritage, we found that
Uh-huh.
it will no longer comply simply because so much changes have happened to Kampong Air.
That's
Yeah,
true. Yeah. That's quite interesting.
yeah.
Um, um, situation that we are facing there. Now, last question.
Uh,
How can international visitors and tourists to Brunei experience and appreciate its rich cultural heritage, and what are some must-visit sites and
oh,
events? Like,
okay.
when would be the
Well,
best?
okay. The Harura is important because I think one of the important things during Harura is that the palace is open. So for 3
Mhm.
days, you
Ah,
will be able to dance during the second, third, and fourth day of Hari Raya. So
right.
that's quite more people actually come for that. So
Yeah.
you'll see tourists lining up at the palace trying to greet. So that's the most important thing that you must visit. I think
Right.
there's yeah, because during His Majesty's birthday, it's not just the palace, but you can see the everything around the area. You'll see pop up ceremony. All these
Yeah.
little little market here and there opening up. All the food stalls and so on. So that's probably the best time to come in Brunei,
So in
around
two
July.
weeks. weeks time.
Every July, yes, every July. No, but Hari Raya is also important now because,
Right.
as
Okay.
always, if you're a food person, there's all this food all over the place. So, you can see all the stalls suddenly propping
I
up and
know.
so on. So this is the best time, to visit
Yeah.
Muslim countries, not just in Brunei, actually. I think throughout the
Oh, yeah, of
Muslim
course.
world, yeah, So those are the two, I think, biggest event that if you want to come. There were lots of other events and so on, but those are the two biggest. Um, visits here in Brunei. Brunei is fairly small, so you don't really have to stay that long sometimes. Stay here for 2 days. I probably will be able to take you to visit all the major sites in the world, all the major sites of Brunei. And of course, I think during your last visit, we didn't have that bridge. We now have the longest bridge in Southeast Asia.
I saw that
So
one, yeah, in the recent
yeah.
video, and I was surprised.
So that in
Yeah.
itself is
All right.
worth visiting, just to take your photo and say this is the longest bridge in Southeast Asia. Yes.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you
So
don't want to
I'm
visit the
so looking
museums or
forward to it.
whatever, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
something, because we are now able to connect to our fourth district, which previously we couldn't do so.
Ah.
So now
Yeah.
we don't have to
Wow.
leave the country. Previously, you would have to go through Malaysia to enter the fourth district, but now we can just go
That's
direct. So there are some
interesting.
elements of modernity that which you can visit other than the museums and so on. So we
Of
do
course.
have quite a number of marvels like the Umar Ali Saifuddin Mosque, which is probably one of the most one of the beautiful mosques in Southeast Asia as well. So quite a few. Yeah,
Yeah.
please do come. Yeah.
Of course. I will.
Unfortunately, time is too short for me to start listing everything, but yeah.
I No, but it's been a very, very interesting and insightful discussion we have today. Dr. Rozan, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon from Bandar Sri Begawan, the capital city of Brunei Darussalam, right in the heart of Southeast Asia. And again, thank you so
Thank you.
much for sharing your insights and a lot more to all of us here in Southeast Asian countries and beyond. And I'm Muhammad Reza from the Good News from Southeast Asia. Thank you for joining me. And everyone, please a round of applause for Dr. Rozan Yunus, the president of the Brunei Historical Society. And again, Muhammad Reza, I thank you for joining me and then watching us. And Dr. Yunus, thank you so much, Ramadan Kareem. And then enjoy the iftar time in Bandar Sri Begawan. And hopefully, I can see you in person in Brunei
Inshallah.
very soon.
We'll see you.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Have a good evening. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah.
Right. Thank you, everyone, again for joining me and Dr. Rozan Yunus on our Instagram Live on Brunei's rich heritage in modern ASEAN. And I will be having a lot more interesting discussion in the near future. So you stay tuned on our Instagram account. And you can ask anything you like if you've got any questions or any ideas that you would like to know. All right. So again, I wish you a very, very blessed Ramadan Kareem wherever you are, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye. Thank you so much, Dr. Razan. See you again very soon, and stay in touch.
Right.
And yeah, Assalamualaikum.
Salam.